News 2 presents a special Sunday edition, Return to Poland, with Marcia Kramer.
I'm Marcia Kramer. In the next hour, you and I together will return to Poland to explore what I found to be a pretty amazing thing: the staggering amounts of property that rightfully belong to the Polish Jews who died in the Holocaust, Holocaust survivors, or their sons and daughters. Now, before Hitler, Poland was home to 3.5 million Jews. Many were extremely wealthy. But after Hitler unleashed its armored tanks and his goose-stepping infantry, and after he built his death camps, Polish Jews were almost wiped out. Now, more than 50 years after they fled Poland with only their lives, a few Polish Jews and their families have returned to the land of their birthright to fight for their family property. During this broadcast, you'll meet Holocaust survivor Estelle Sapir, Richard Sheldon, the son of 2 Holocaust survivors, and Benny Taub, whose dad fled his homeland to save his life. You will see how their souls are still deeply rooted in Poland's soil, and you will learn what that means for them and what it may mean for other Holocaust survivors and their families, Jew and non-Jew alike.
I mean, I never thought it would be here. I never thought it would be here.
Richard Sheldon was excited as he stepped through the doorway of a gray stone building in Warsaw, Poland, and came face to face with his past, his present, and now his future. In the cracked paint of the once elegant passageway, the sweep of the still majestic building, he sees the face of his grandfather, Eliash Mazur, who lived in a top-floor apartment so grand it went all the way around this courtyard. Eliash Mazur was a pillar of the community and a wealthy Jewish banker. He fled Poland one step ahead of the Nazis, leaving behind a fabulous lifestyle, but he was one of the lucky ones. Yes, he had to abandon his home and all he held dear, but at least he escaped with his life. Most Polish Jews weren't as lucky. As the world knows, Hitler's mission was to annihilate the Jews. Poland became a special target of Hitler because it harbored the single largest Jewish community in the world. About 3.5 million of Poland's population of 35 million was Jewish. By the end of World War II, 3.2 million Polish Jews had been murdered, comprising just over half the 6 million Jews of all nationalities slaughtered by the Nazis as part of the Holocaust. But the Jews of Poland were also wealthy. While only 10% of the population, they paid 30% of the taxes. Taxes on owning land, running banks, selling diamonds, leasing real estate, building hotels, processing food, and importing and exporting goods of all kinds. They left their homes and their businesses behind as they fled the country or were taken to concentration camps. Now, more than 50 years after the pain, the suffering of the war, there is still the nagging question of the property. Scott Sheldon is Eliash Mazur's 12-year-old grandson.
It belongs to us and we should always keep it.
The communist chokehold on Poland froze any hopes that the land or the homes could be reclaimed. But now the climate, for the very first time, is right to try. Why is the timing so right? Well, with the Swiss finally agreeing to at least try to return some of the looted Holocaust cash, Poland, with its thriving pre-war Jewish community, looks like the next big battleground in the demand for true war reparations. So to investigate firsthand, News 2 headed for Poland. And what I discovered is mind-boggling. In cities and villages throughout Poland, there's a staggering amount of property that rightfully belongs to Jews and others who became enemies of the Nazis. I went with a group of daring New Yorkers who believe they have legitimate property claims to make. I traveled the emotional journey with them, and over the next hour, I'll share their stories with you. You'll meet Richard Sheldon, his wife Cyril, daughter Stacy, age 15, son Scott, age 12, and daughter Sloan, she's 10. Richard's grandfather was one of the richest men in Poland.
There's a little bit of anger, and part of the realization that is if there wasn't a war, I'd be a citizen of Poland and I'd live my life in Poland.
A lonely Estelle Sapir, returning to Poland for the very first time since the Nazis drove her out at age 16. Her wealthy banker father, Joseph, and most of her family were gassed or shot to death in the Holocaust. She brought her niece, Jeanette Bernstein, and nephew, Herbert Bronner, to give her strength.
I am scared. I'm scared for my feeling. It's terrible. It's terrible.
And Israeli Benny Taub, whose family came from the Polish city of Lodz. The largest group of Holocaust survivors came from Lodz.
Just give me back my property. Give it back to me. It belongs to me.
In a sense, these New Yorkers are pioneers, traveling an ocean to reclaim these streets and these buildings. Just 2 undercover cameras will take you to a huge depository of official real estate records the Polish government hoped nobody would discover, and show you hard evidence to back up our property claims.
This says owners of the property, which the book is for, and the name Eliasz Mazur, Chaim Leiser Vel Leon Mazur, Aaron Vel Adolf Mazur, in Israel.
And I'll introduce you to some lawyers who hope to help Jews and other Polish citizens recover property that is rightfully theirs.
They should never have lost it in the first place. And the fact that somebody's holding on to it is, they're like squatters. And it's our job to get it back.
I wondered if you could explain to me what, if anything, the Polish government or the legislature is contemplating in terms of dealing with this very difficult problem.
Rząd polski przygotował projekt ustawy.
Polish government prepared already the legislation which is dealing with the churches, with any church, including Jewish community. And there is a special legislation, but the process is going to be very long because it has been 50 years which passed, and the property was in different hands, so the very problem requires very careful consideration.
There is an urgency now to reclaim the property because 5 to 10 Holocaust survivors die each and every day. I should tell you that the Israeli government has now decided to assist in reclaiming Polish property, and that U.S. Senator Alphonse D'Amato is on the case. We'll hear from him later. When we return, Richard Sheldon sees his grandfather's land and his mother's stories of her childhood actually exist in Warsaw, Poland. Many Poles go to sleep at night smugly thinking that the property they took from Jews driven out and murdered by Hitler is theirs for eternity. But they haven't met New Yorker Richard Sheldon. At the gate at Kennedy Airport and on a 767 bound for Warsaw, Sheldon was already planning strategy with his lawyer Edward Fagan to hit the Polish soil running. Now, we traveled with him to Poland several weeks ago, and what we learned about his family's holdings and lands owned by countless others, well, it made him furious. Now he's ready to take on the entire Polish government.
How could you do this? How could you not know that you stole somebody else's loved possession and did this? But there's a sense of being raped, a sense of being violated, that, you know, that something that was dear to somebody was just taken away, and there's no recourse, and there's just a sense of that these people, probably the day my grandparents moved out, they just moved right in, and it just doesn't seem right.
Richard Sheldon's anger boiled over as he walked the streets of Warsaw with his wife Cyril, son Scott, and daughters Stacy and Sloan. The hard-nosed businessman who grew up on West End Avenue in Manhattan felt his fury grow as he looked into the impassive faces of the men, women, and children who filled the streets, many living and working in buildings erected and owned by his ancestors. Richard's mother grew up here, living a life of privilege as the daughter of one of the richest men in Poland. Eliash Mazur owned banks and rice processing plants and buildings, lots of buildings, all left behind as he fled the country to escape Hitler's armies. With Mazur gone, others, including the government, simply took over his property. But now, just as Holocaust survivors made the Swiss banks pay up, Richard wants the Polish government to pay up.
I want it back. I didn't think I ever wanted it back, but now I want it back. And there's a real sense of anger.
2 years ago, Richard hired a researcher to help him. The first clue he turned up was this 1934 Warsaw telephone book. It had 2 address listings for Eliash Mazur. Going to Poland with me was the next step. In order to prove that Richard Shelton owned the property, I had to come to Warsaw's official Hall of Records. And you wouldn't believe what I found. You're looking at undercover video that I shot as Polish officials told us it was just not possible to find the documents that Richard Sheldon sought. But I talked my way in through a low-level clerk. He opened the door to a vast treasure trove of property records dating back over 100 years. Records that could prove the ownership claims of Eliash Mazur and countless others, Jews and non-Jews, pushed out by the war. What was more amazing, I actually found the exact leather-bound volumes showing beyond a doubt that Richard Sheldon's grandfather owned the properties. There it is. There's your grandfather. There it is.
Yep.
There's your grandfather.
I have 1933 dust on me.
How does that make you feel?
Connected. Truly does. Truly feel connected to this.
Can I ask you something? How does it make you feel looking at these documents and seeing your grandfather's name on these documents proving that he owned this property?
This is the most connected I've ever been to since the time I saw him in Israel. This is the most connected. I'm amazed that it's moving me like this. I really feel that this connection, that he's a real person. He existed.
I found proof that Eliash Mazur owned buildings at 18A Nowogrodska, 3 Malkatowska, and 34 Malkatowska. But then the clerk said it was closing time, and we had to leave. The route from City Hall led right here to the apartment building where Richard Shelton's mother actually lived.
I can't believe it. I'm really fluttering. My heart is fluttering. I am so excited, and I just can't believe that it exists, because I really was sure that we would come to an empty lot or there'd be some government building here. And to see it and to know that it's real and that this is where my mother was until the time she left for America I'm just almost speechless. I mean, I'm shocked.
We got inside, and Richard led his wife and me up the marble stairs of 18A Nowogrodska, the very stairs his mother used as a little girl.
So bizarre.
Mazur's building at 34 Malkatowska turned out to have been destroyed during the war. There's a park there now, where in the 50 years since the war, a stand of chestnut trees have grown tall and flourished. Richard insists that the land, the trees, are his.
What's amazing is that this is the only thing left of what was obviously a place that my mother and grandfather lived. That's all that's left. It's beautiful.
Is that a chestnut?
It looks like a piece of wood, but it is a chestnut. And I'm going to take this back and show it to my mother. It might be the only memory she will have of where she grew up before she moved.
3 Malkatowska was his grandfather's wedding present to his mother. It's where his mother planned to make her first home, but war broke out during her honeymoon and she never returned to Poland. We talked to a young woman there who at first was quite unsympathetic about Richard's quest to reclaim his property.
I don't know what could I say, because I'm a young person, so I don't feel responsible for what had happened. it's a sad story. Like I don't know, the history is sad. You are first time for the same in Poland, yes?
First time.
Yeah. And how do you feel here, in the country of your parents and grandparents? I don't know.
More excited to be here than I thought. Feeling more connected than I thought I would.
I see.
But on the other hand, have very mixed feelings of sadness, and a little bit of anger.
Yeah.
Minutes later, though, she returned. And believe it or not, she invited the entire Sheldon family into her home for tea. She said that maybe they would like to see her apartment, which, if not for the war, might have been the very place Richard was raised. This turreted building is one of the many beautiful sights in Warsaw, and Richard couldn't believe that the Polish government owned it. He also couldn't believe that about a third of the building is on his property. Richard estimates his grandfather owned dozens of properties in Poland, and he's not the only one. Jews all over the country were forced to abandon their homes, their businesses, everything they held dear.
But this really happened, even though it was before my times. I realized just how closely linked I am to this country and to the war and the significance of it. And everything that we've done the last couple of days have just told me that my life would have been so different. And so I really feel almost a kinship, a closeness, yet at the same time, anger and frustration about what happened and a lot of sadness.
I confronted the government about righting the wrongs done to its citizens during the war. Krzysztof Laskowitz, the vice minister of the Treasury, might just have been trying to put me off. But after a while, he admitted that the country faces a big problem.
Liczymy, że
By statistical means, we estimated that there are about 170,000 people who could claim their rights.
But 3 million Polish Jews were killed in the concentration camps. Don't you expect that more than 170,000 people will have claims?
to jest roszczeń, nie osób.
We are talking about the number of property, not number of the people.
Experts grimace at that lowball estimate, equating it to the Swiss at first saying they only had a few $100,000 of Jewish money in their vaults. But that's nothing compared to the pain Richard's 83-year-old mother felt when he returned to New York and showed her pictures of her childhood home, scenes that brought back a devastating time.
Forgive me, but, you know, the memories. When you think that they went so suffering, not in a normal way, it hurts, even now.
Before he left for Poland, Richard Sheldon found it hard to believe he would actually find his family's property. Now he is a believer, and you can believe that Richard Sheldon will return to Poland to take back his land. When we return, you'll meet Estelle Sapir, a tough little lady who, empty inside because of the Holocaust, nevertheless pushed herself to return to the country of her birth and face the painful memories of Nazi gas chambers and firing squads. When the Nazi death march drove Estelle Sapir from Poland at the age of 16, she vowed to get even. She joined the resistance, planting bombs that blew up German supply trains. When the Swiss refused to give her the money in her father's bank accounts, she vowed to fight them. And after 50 years, she became one of the first to get an actual cash settlement from Hitler's bankers. Now the former bomb thrower has vowed to make the Polish government restore her family's property. But it is the most painful battle of her 73 years.
I have nobody. I have to do it.
The shock, the anguish never left Estelle Sapir for one single moment of her return to Poland. Yes, she speaks softly, but the Polish government shouldn't underestimate Estelle's resolve. Just minutes before, her stomach had twisted in knots as she caught her first glimpse of the Polish countryside from the window of the airplane, taking her back to the place where she was born, where her father and most of her family died in Nazi gas chambers and by firing squads. But after the plane touched down on Polish soil, she gathered herself up, all 4 feet 7 inches of her, and marched through the airport with her niece Jeanette Bernstein and nephew Herbert Bronner. She was intent on finding her family property and reclaiming it for them as much as herself. This train station was the last thing Estelle saw when she left Poland, and it was a boxcar like this that brought her father, Joseph Sapir, to the death camp. Oddly, before they killed him, the Nazis took this picture of the men in her father's barracks. Joseph Sapir is in the top row on the right. Seeing Warsaw again after more than 50 years, Estelle became withdrawn. She sunk into sadness at the stark reality confronting her. All of her relatives had been murdered. She had no one. She was the only survivor. And so she found it almost impossible to relate to the brightly colored trolley cars, the first modern skyscrapers dotting the skyline. She said we'd find her family's apartment right around the corner from the dreaded Pawiak prison, where a tree with no bark and severed limbs stands as a memorial to all the Poles, Jew and Christian, murdered by the Nazis.
I see faces from everybody, from all my family, when they've been shot here. I heard the voices just calling my name. I remember the sound from the bullets, and I remember the walking from the German soldier.
Estelle's footsteps slowed as she walked toward the place where she grew up. Wonderment at the way the streets had changed, mixed with terrible, terrible memories. You're shaking.
Yeah.
Are you cold or scared?
No. Terrible. It's terrible to go back.
A few more steps.
Oh my God, I cannot believe this. I really cannot believe it.
So we came with Estelle to the very spot where her house once stood. She trembled, she shook, and she had to turn away.
I want to stop.
Estelle discovered that the apartment building her banker father owned had been destroyed during the war. In its place, she saw this Russian-built apartment building. The banker father owned on Senatorska Street was now a row of stores, including a deli. But instead of crushing her, the changes, the rush of harsh memories, strengthened her resolve to hire lawyers to help reclaim her property. Their first stop will surely be this Warsaw Real Estate Records Depository that I discovered and explored with the help of a cooperative clerk. She hopes this dusty room, where I found records crucial to proving claims from other Holocaust victims, will also provide the evidence to make her case the same way she finally made her case to the Swiss.
This belongs to us. I don't know how long I'm going. I'm an old lady. But nobody has a right to this.
I stopped on the street to ask her a question. If you could talk to people in the Polish government now, what would you say to them?
To give it back, to give me back. This really belongs to the family.
After her pilgrimage to Warsaw, Estelle still had one more difficult thing to do, and it was the saddest journey of her life. Estelle traveled 150 miles through the countryside to visit the Majdanek concentration camp where her father was murdered by the Nazis. But before she toured the camp, Estelle told me she was driven by the need to tell her father that she had accomplished the one task he had asked when they parted for the last time, getting the money from the Swiss banks.
I promised to my daddy. I promised him in French, in Polish, in English. I promised him I'm going to come. And here I am, no matter how hard, how terrible I am. And I go kissed the heart where he was walking the last minute. I kept my promise, Daddy.
Estelle Sapir's return to Poland was heart-wrenching. She set foot on Polish soil for the very first time in over 50 years because in many respects, she is a warrior. She wants her family's property back now. But a visit to the concentration camp where her father was murdered was almost too much to bear. For her, for me, for cameraman Tracy Emery, and now for you.
This is the last thing what I'm going to do in life. But I'm going to do it.
A stunned Estelle Sapir stood on a hillside overlooking the Majdanek concentration camp, glancing quickly at the forbidding wooden guard posts, the rusty barbed wire fences, designed to hold Jews earmarked for slaughter. Since she had never returned to Poland since being driven out by the Nazis as a young girl, she had no idea what to expect. It was worse, far worse than she imagined. She thought of her father, her beloved father, Joseph Sapir, and she shuddered. Estelle's father made the trip to Majdanek in a boxcar like this. And he spent his last night in one of these barracks. It was here, staring at the place where her father spent his last night on Earth, that Estelle told me the story of the ring she always wears on the fourth finger of her left hand. Her father gave it to her the last time she saw him through the sharp barbed wire of a different concentration camp. It was his wedding ring. And was it barbed wire like this barbed wire here?
Yes, the same barbed wire.
So you were on one side?
Yeah, I was on one side, he was on the other side.
Come show me how it was.
Yeah, I could show you. It was a smaller one.
Smaller one?
Yes. See?
And he reached his hand out?
Yes, he kissed my fingers and I kissed his finger. That's all what between the wires I could pass. This is big wires. You see, it's a little bit smaller than this.
The color drained from Estelle's face as she glanced away, looking at the tall fields of grass surrounding the barracks, swirling in the wind, as if possessed of the spirit of Joseph Sapir and the tens of thousands of others murdered here.
This is the last time when I kissed his fingers, he kissed mine. And he was waved to me. Goodbye. I see you soon. In Polish and in French. Have courage. I am coming back. Take care of your mother. Take care of everything. I promise myself I never stop, never to the last minute. I'm going to go to Poland to ask for what belongs to me and to the grandchildren. I don't have too long to live. May they have a whole life. This belongs to them. And I am going to fight for this. Daddy, I kept my promise, and I'm going to keep the promise what I told you. I told you when I survive. I promise you, when I survive, I'm going to be strong, and I'm going to fight for everything. I remember.
Estelle's visit to Majdanek took her to a grotesque memorial, a crude but colossal spaceship-like structure filled with the ashes of those gassed and cremated here. It is open to the air, which horrified Estelle and her family, niece Jeanette Bernstein and nephew Herbert Bronner.
The ashes blown on me, in my eyes, in my mouth. Ah.
Then she went into the crematorium. Estelle stared at the gas chamber, at the hole where the deadly Zyklon B gas had poured out, killing her daddy and all the others. Then, ever so softly, she ran her fingers over the cement table, where after he was dead, her father's body was sliced up by Nazi henchmen, the gold teeth wrenched from his mouth. But the worst, the very worst, were the ovens, which in some twisted oversight still held the ashes of dead Jews and others. Maybe, just maybe, thought Estelle, her father's ashes were somehow mixed in with those in the oven. She shocked us when she took an empty pill container and reached deep into one of the ovens. She wanted ashes, her father's ashes, to bury next to her mother in a cemetery back home in Cedar Park, New Jersey.
My soul cries out to God.
The last thing Estelle did was light candles, memorial candles, to honor the souls of her father and the rest of her relatives murdered here and another Nazi death camp scattered throughout Poland. Finally, with her niece and nephew on either side, Estelle said Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for the dead.
I love him. He's always been my hero.
It's a simple fact, but one that's hard for some to swallow. Jews own fully 1/3 of the wealth in pre-World War II Poland, a wealth larger in both size and magnitude than the gold Holocaust victims deposited in Swiss banks. But Poland didn't have a mere handful of wealthy Jews. Jewish merchants were everywhere, owning huge chunks of cities and towns across the country. One of them was Benny Taub's father.
I know exactly how much property he left, and I think the cost in today's value is tens of millions of dollars.
Tens of millions of dollars. I must admit that at first I had a hard time believing Benny Taub's claims. Then I went to Lodz, a once grand city of wide boulevards and ornate buildings in the northwest part of Poland, where the Taub family lived for generation after generation until they escaped to Palestine one step ahead of Hitler's armies.
He believed that leaving the country would have been the best for his family. And actually speaking, he was right. Because while leaving the whole property behind, he saved the whole family, which means my mother and his brother, and with 3 kids. When he did it, a lot of our friends and family says, "You are crazy, you are going to leave all your property behind." And my father and his brother were one of the richest people in Lodz. They owned a huge amount of real estate.
Taub's attorney came with us to inspect the property the family left behind when they fled the Nazis. As I started to walk the streets with attorney Michael Whitty, I really had no sense of how much real estate in Lodz had been stolen from the Jews living there.
They owned more or less whole Lodz.
This street, Piotrowska, is like the Fifth Avenue of Lodz. With its graceful dome structures, posh stores, and elaborate apartment complexes, it is often closed to traffic. Poles use bicycle pedicabs to get around. Before the war, most of Piotrowska was owned by Jews, including the Taub family. To start the process of trying to get his family real estate back, Taub did an exhaustive search of local records. With Whitty's help, he found proof. These records on file in Lodz provided the hard evidence to prove Taub's ownership claims. These are some of the buildings Taub insists the Polish government must give back to his family. Michael Whitty and I found every single one of them. The Taub family owned 480 apartments, including this entire block of Sterlinga Street, a bank on Piotrowska Street, which is where the government now runs this post office, and the Hotel Savoy.
I've been to Hotel Savoy, it's full up. You can't get a room in the Hotel Savoy, and who gets the money? The government. Why should they get it? They did not sell the Hotel Savoy to somebody, to some Polish private people. They gave it to the union of the hotel organization in Lodz to operate. Where does the money goes? I don't know.
Benny doesn't know where the money goes from the businesses operating out of the address number 20 Piotrowska Street, a building that he owns. But inside the courtyard of number 20, all the commercial space is full, and I don't believe any of the flats above the commercial space are vacant. Benny's father, Giel, built the Hotel Savoy, ran the bank, operated all the apartment buildings. But face to face with the German war machine and Hitler's vow to kill all the Jews, Giel Taub decided to get out of Poland fast.
He just felt, and he told the family, well, we think we should go, leave everything and go to Israel or to Palestine, and let's save our souls.
An angry Benny has been trying for 5 long years to get his property back.
It is mine. I must give it back. It is the justice. It's justice to have it back. It's not that I'm asking something which is not against the justice. This is exactly just pure justice. I want to have it back.
Benny Taub represents so many others, the offspring of over 3 million Polish Jews who were either slaughtered or driven out by the Nazis.
The Jews were the wealthiest people in Poland. 10% of the population paid 30% of the taxes, and that's really an important figure, 30% of the taxes. A lot of the taxes were real estate. We're literally a third of Poland appears to have been confiscated by the government.
Lawyers like Ed Fagan and Carrie DeVino and German attorney Michael Whitty were key players in forcing Swiss banks to agree recently to open their vaults and give Holocaust survivors nearly $1.5 billion. Now they say their next target is Poland. They want to force the Poles to do the same thing with Jewish real estate, give it back to its rightful owners.
Give it all back. Open the closets, let the bones fall out where they may, go through the record books. Why did it, okay, so you waited 50 some odd years, but go open every one of those books and start publishing names of people. Don't make them look for you. You know who every person is. Give it back.
That's right, the records do exist. I found some of them myself in Warsaw, a real estate records depository the Poles had hoped that nobody would discover. Take a good hard look at these property ledgers. There are rooms like this in Warsaw and Krakow and Lodz and towns and villages all across this country. So if the Polish government tries to say there are no records of Jews owning property here, well, they wouldn't be telling the truth. Knowing now that the pre-war records do exist, I confronted the Polish government with a hypothetical question. If a man who claims to have a claim on a property goes to the records office and finds a record that shows that his grandfather owned the property in the 30s and that now the building is owned by the state, what chance does he have, if he can prove that he's the rightful heir, of getting his property back?
No, otrzyma, dlatego że jeżeli jest mienie...
It will be returned itself, although after the whole legislative, lawful road is supposed to be fulfilled.
Mr. President or Mr. Minister, whatever your name is, just give me back my property. Give it back to me. It belongs to me. It always belonged to me and to the partners in this property.
Right now, there's no indication how long it will be until the government agrees to pass legislation to return property to Jews and others driven out by the war. But Laskowitz confessed to me that the government is just now beginning to feel pressure to do so. Lawyers say that our News 2 reports will add to that pressure. And what's more, the lawyers say there are hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, of Polish immigrants in New York and Israel and all over the world who can legitimately demand their land back, this land.
I would not take out any of those families from their home because they've been living there for the last, I don't know, 50 years. So what they should do, they should pay a normal and up-to-date rental, and they should keep the apartments. If they want to buy the apartments, why not? Let's have the up-to-date price in Poland of those apartments, and I'm going to sell it to them. I'm not going to throw anybody from their home, but I think that I can throw the government people from the hotel and the government people or the large municipality people from the bank.
As we traveled around Poland this week, what we saw was the wealth of a nation. And it wasn't the wealth of the Polish nation, this was the wealth of the Jewish nation. And it's still here. The old country is not a myth. It hasn't been swallowed up by the Holocaust. Americans need to know that the old country is here and it's your legacy.
And you want to get it back?
I think that we have to work with the Polish government, and I think the Polish government wants to join the community of nations now, and I believe that the prospects are very good for restoring this legacy to Jews all over the world.
If you think you have claims, there are many ways to press them.
Take a pen, take paper. They should start writing. I think every one of them should start writing the Polish consulate in New York. I think they should start flooding the Polish government with letters saying, we tried to get this for 50 some odd years.
Lawyers Ed Fagan and Carrie DeVino say they're going to file suit against the Polish government. Meanwhile, Benny Taub promised me that the first money he gets from Poland will go to fix the forgotten Jewish cemetery in Lodz. He'll visit that cemetery when we return. In Warsaw, Lodz, and the Majdanek concentration camp, Jew haters have today placed anti-Semitic slogans near the paths where millions of people see them. The slogans open up deep wounds in Holocaust survivors and their families.
It's time somebody really stand up behind us.
I'm just so angry that they took it in the first place and they never should have.
I have tremendous anger. I'm here and I'm proud to be a Jewess, and my kids will be proud to follow in these footsteps, and it will never ever happen again if I can help it.
They come from 3 different generations spanning 61 years, but all 3 were touched in similar ways by their return to Poland and the hunt for property and possessions belonging to their loved ones. It was in many ways an emotionally draining trip, as all these New Yorkers were made to face the harsh reality that today, more than 5 decades after World War II, Jews are still the hated and the hunted in Poland. The anti-Semitic graffiti is everywhere. This is the apartment house that was given to Richard Shelton's mother as a wedding present. Imagine our surprise when we got here and we found this piece of anti-Semitism scrawled on the wall, a hangman's noose with a Jewish star. But there's much more. Anti-Semitic slogans are scrawled on the walls of buildings in Lodz to attack an unsuccessful soccer team and carved into a wooden beam of the Majdanek concentration camp. Then there are the charred remains of a room in the Warsaw synagogue that was firebombed last year by unidentified arsonists that have not yet been brought to justice. But the lack of respect for Jews in Poland is also evident in the single largest Jewish cemetery in Europe. It's in Lodz. 180,000 people are buried there, but apparently nobody cares about it. I found graves that had been desecrated, headstones broken, and weeds, fields and fields of weeds growing 6 feet high. So high that in many spots it's hard to make out the graves. After experiencing and feeling the place that had slaughtered their relatives, I asked these New Yorkers if they still wanted to fight for the return of their property. To talk about this, we all came to a tiny village where the bright, shiny images of apple trees and outdoor cafes and kids eating pretzels stood in stark contrast to the dark underside of Poland we experienced for a week.
I want everything back. I'm very, very angry. I'm the Polish people, I'm the Polish government, no matter which one. And I want everything back.
I think they should just admit that it actually did occur.
I would like to get back the properties that my grandfather owned.
For many, there is sustained anger at the Polish government.
They sat back and watched millions of Jews perish in a horrible way, and then they took their property. So I think it's only right that they turn something that was wrong into something that is right.
For these New Yorkers and the thousands, perhaps millions of others who think they have legitimate claims to lands in Poland, the big question is what's next. The Polish government itself is now engaged in an internal debate on what to do. One high-ranking Polish official, Krzysztof Laskowicz, the Vice Minister of the Treasury, told me Western nations are just starting to pressure his government to do the right thing as a means of being allowed to participate in Western alliances like NATO and the European Union.
Reprivatization is an important part of the transformation of the state. And one cannot build on the harm made to people, and you cannot build new state on it.
Laskowicz talks the talk of doing the right thing, but when it comes right down to it, will his government walk the walk and give the property back? Remember, even his own very own conservative estimates indicate there are 170,000 buildings the state must give back to Jews and others driven out by Hitler. Many think it will take pressure from abroad, including Israel and the United States. One American who's ready to jump into the fray is U.S. Senator Alphonse D'Amato, who praised the work of News 2 in opening up this issue for worldwide inspection. D'Amato told me he intends to hold hearings to explore how many Americans have claims on property in Poland.
This is not a matter of retribution. This is a matter of justice, where claims can be substantiated, the properties have been taken improperly and belong to others, that there is absolutely an obligation, particularly where the governments themselves control the property. And that is just inexcusable. And they can make reparations, and there are ways of making settlements.
There's a real sense that during the World War II, the American government didn't do as much as they could to maybe help the Jewish people in all of their torturous route, and that maybe now this is a time for them to admit, particularly the State Department, that they ignored what was known evidence about what was going on with the Jews. And though it's 60 years later, I would hope that maybe they could do something to make up for those times.
In terms of bringing Poland into NATO and bringing Poland into the sphere of influence of Western Europe and the United States, I think the U.S. government has a role to play here, and we'll be talking to them about that.
The American government should not get in our way of trying to get back the properties that belong to these people.
What should the American government do?
They should support the people, stand by them, just to get the properties back, or compensation.
Jeanette, what should the American government do?
I think they definitely should intervene on our behalf, and I think if they stood up, they have a lot of clout.
Seeing the extent of the property Jews and others can lay claim to in Poland solidified attorney Ed Fagan's commitment to forcing the Polish government's hand.
Makes me want to take a 2x4 and hit him in the head and say, I don't know why it took this long for us to get your attention, but make no mistakes about this, we are going to get your attention now, and then we'll talk.
I returned to New York with new memories of Estelle Sapir, lonely in her Polish homeland because Hitler's Nazis murdered her family. New memories of Richard Sheldon, feeling so strange, his heart fluttering as he walked on the property his grandfather owned and on the very stairs his mother used as a child. And new memories of an angry Benny Taub being robbed of millions of dollars by the Polish government, which controls large blocks of his property that his father abandoned to save his soul. I can only hope that my return to Poland may someday cause the Polish people to return the lands to their Jewish brothers and sisters, Holocaust survivors, their sons and daughters. It would be a just and great memory for us all. Thank you.